just for me personally, trying to have more joy within my activism and focus on more joy and things that spark that for me, because it is sustainable. Joy is sustainable, and we can't go on without it because it can be draining work.
This is Climate Curious, the podcast for people who are bored, scared, or confused by climate change.
I'm Maryam, the director and curator at TEDxLondon and the co-host of this podcast, alongside the amazing Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, and self-confessed climate normie.
So for those of you who don't live in London or in the UK, you might not be aware, but we're facing, I think, the first time in decades, maybe, a summer of a lot of strike action. So we've just come, in London, we've just come through strike action on public transport and across England on the railways. We're looking at strike action in the airports. I think even like doctors are thinking about striking, which I think is quite unique. And so
super legit.
It's about the idea of collective action. So I don't know, Ben, is this something that is this like your bread and butter, collective action?
No, it's not my bread and butter, but honest truth, the other day I did think, probably for the first time in my life, why don't we all just strike? Like, in the face of like a massive cost of living crisis, I was like, oh yeah, that does actually make sense. I think it's the first time I've understood like why people do it. Obviously, because it is personally affecting me now. No, I'm joking. I guess that there's a lot more power involved when everybody's actually united in fighting for whatever cause it is that they're trying to win or trying to achieve. Podcast done, guys. See you later.
So that is probably a very good intro to our wonderful guest this week. We're joined by Dominique Palmer, who is a climate activist, youth activist, social justice, climate justice activist. I read in your bio also aspiring actress, model, host, speaker. I think the list goes on. I was reading through all the things you've spoken at, and I have to admit I ran out of time in my reading through the list. But we're so excited to have you here, and I'm actually really excited to talk about this because I kind of grew up really believing in unions and the power of collective action and seeing it, and then just hearing about what like the Thatcher era was like for my parents and feeling like there was some moments there of real solidarity, but then it kind of all getting muddled and people just getting a bit upset that they can't go to work on time. And so I'm excited to talk about the idea of collective action in terms of the climate. But before we get into all of that, can you just tell us a little bit more about you for our listeners?
Yeah, thank you for having me on here.
You are so welcome.
So I'm a youth climate justice activist, speaker, writer, and student in the UK. I wear a lot of hats, so I do a lot of things at various times. I'm mainly an organiser in Fridays for Future International, which is a global youth movement for climate justice, a coordinator in Climate Live, which is about uniting music and climate together to engage, educate, and empower people for climate action. And I'm a member of an organisation called Bad Activist Collective, which is trying to dismantle the idea of perfectionism within the climate movement.
I want to ask you, as someone who is so immersed in the climate movement, how you got to this point, because I think that's really interesting to me, and then I want to ask you about collective action. But first I want to know kind of what's been your journey. There's some pretty awesome organizations that you're involved in. How did you get here?
Give us your superhero origin story. Give it to us. We want to know.
Here's my origin story. I really never imagined myself being a climate activist at all, but I was a bit interested in like sustainability and things. When I was younger, I went vegan and tried to do like different like individual actions I could do. And it's not really until 2019 that I really tapped into the climate movement. And that was because where I was living at the time in South London, in Lewisham, I was seeing these like posters around my area about how air pollution was really affecting our community where we were living. And I went to the local like Jamaican restaurant one day and I was talking to this lady just about general things. And she was talking about how her child was also suffering from asthma and how air pollution was making it worse. And this is something that my younger brother had previously, asthma, and was facing that. And I kind of started to connect the dots about how the climate and ecological emergency was like right there, and I could see it in my community, and it was affecting people today. And that's around when more climate actions around the world started happening, and Greta started striking outside Parliament, and I saw, okay, people are doing stuff about this, so that's something that I can do. Because at first, I was incredibly overwhelmed and thinking, what can I possibly do about this massive thing that's happening? And I just started learning more, and then I saw a climate strike happening in May, and I went to it, and then I never looked back, because the energy was incredible, and I thought, okay, there's real power here, there's real energy here, we can actually do something about this. And then started pushing intersectionality in the climate movement. So climate strikes, in the same year I found myself at the UN Climate Change Conference. It was just wild. That's my origin story.
So you may not know this about me, Ben. Dominique, you definitely know this about me because we just met. But my first memory of life is being at a protest.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I just remember being very upset because they wouldn't let me hold the really big sign. I was 3, so obviously they're not going to let me hold
I need that
the
one.
side of a banner. But I really wanted to, and I remember being really upset.
Oh, that's cute.
But listening to you now, I'm kind of reminded of this idea. Listening to you makes me think about how something that's so valuable to feel part of something is to actually get out and be with other people. Like, I think sometimes these big issues can feel so overwhelming because they feel isolating. And actually, the power, it is a double-edged sword, because protests can be very overwhelming. It can feel like it's not working. Even in the moment, it can be really upsetting in the protests I've been part of. But there's also this power of being with others. And do you find that sense of community is important to you? Do you think that helped kind of taking you from like, oh, this is something maybe I care about, to actually, doing all this awesome stuff and dedicating so much time to it?
100%. I would go as far as say community is really what's kept me going and just guided me through this movement. I think without it, and without that space to go to, and without those people that you're standing alongside and learning together, and that's really becomes another family to you in a way as well. And it really has for me. Like, the people I've met have become another family to me, and that's really what's kept me going, because the issue can feel so big and so overwhelming, and you're just going and trying to apply pressure to this and this campaign and then this, and it really just allows you to take a moment and step back and have those connections with other people.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I was just going to say, maybe a counterintuitive point, but like the conversation around community I always find so interesting, because I feel like I've hit this point in my life where I'm like so tired of people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's this overwhelming sense of like, actually I'd rather just do this by myself. And obviously, like, that comes with the tension of like, you actually can't do anything by yourself. Like, individual action I think is so difficult and also so overwhelming, that you really do need community. In terms of the work that you're doing at the moment, what is, I think that this conversation can become like so broad and so huge, and there's so many issues. And I know, like I said before, when we met you the first time, you were organising or part of a group that was organising some direct action. I think it was around Stop Cambo, right?
Yeah.
And obviously that is like has been a massive success at this point. How does that process feel for you? Like,
let's tell people what Stop Cambo is.
Okay.
Can we
do it?
Just
what
give us like
is?
A primer on what is Stop Cambo?
Look at me talking about things like
I
I know
know,
what they
I
are.
love it,
Imagine,
Ben.
I've come so
I
far.
love
My
it.
goodness.
A great intro. Yeah, Stop Cambo is a campaign organisation focusing on stopping all new fossil fuel projects, specifically oil and gas projects in the UK. So the hashtag Stop Cambo is for the Cambo oil field. And that time I met you at Countdown, that was a protest outside because the CEO of Shell was there, and we held a protest outside about the new Cambo oil and gas field. And this was after my friend and fellow activist Lauren McDonald called out the CEO of Shell on stage. Then we had a walkout in the building and then walked outside and had a protest. And now the Cambo oil field has been paused, and there's been Stop Cambo involved, there's been 350 as well involved, and Friends of the Earth. And it's just been so incredible to get to a point where it's like, okay, there has been an impact. So we want to go the full way and have it stopped, but it's also like, we're actually making an impact, and that power really is there and our voices have been heard. So that was an incredible day. It was such a happy day. I remember just like phoning people up and be like, yeah, like it's actually paused, like we're actually getting somewhere, we're doing it.
Wow.
That was amazing.
I mean, it's so true, because sometimes when you're a campaigner or an activist, your whole life is spent trying to stop bad things happening, not make good things happen. So you don't see it often, right? Because if you're like, you don't see the things you're stopping because they don't happen, so you stop them, and it can be hard to like feel like you've won or even made any incremental change. I think that's pretty awesome. That day at Countdown, I think the thing that really struck me, and I don't know how it felt for you, but it reminded me that this is not actually easy. I remember. And you know, for anyone listening who's interested, Ted posted the whole session online, so you can actually go watch for the whole hour from the beginning of this, let's call it panel, to through what happens, you know, with the walkout, and then also what happens after. The thing that really struck me was a reminder that this is not easy. I felt this real, for the first time in a while, I felt this real overwhelming sense of, I can't even put a word to it. I remember Ben and you and I sitting together, and I almost felt frozen in place. And I think that maybe people feel like, I don't know, maybe I just had forgotten, because people make it seem so easy, but actually it's and it is lovely to find community and be in it, but there's another side to it, right, which is quite, it can be difficult at times.
Yeah, it's a really interesting experience. How did you find it? How did you find it?
Was it just a regular Tuesday?
Yeah, just every day setting.
I think that's a great point that you guys have made, because I mean, literally the night before that happened, we were up to about 2 a.m. in this like random room in the TED Countdown hotel. There was so much anxiety around it. So people were like, okay, is this going to work? Is it going to work out? And should we do it like this? Are we going to get tackled to the ground? Like, and obviously for, you know, Lauren as well, like that was an incredibly like big moment. And actually right before we did the walkout to where we were going outside, I was like so anxious about what would happen that I was like shaking, even trying to like hold the banner. And I think those kind of moments aren't really spoken about as much, that those moments can be difficult. And I think it also places activists on this pedestal of like, they're these like beings who can just, you know, do it all, like bulletproof, like nothing brings them down, like this is just how it goes. And so it prevents a lot of people getting in, because they're like, okay, like that's, you need to be perfect, you need to be like this, you need to, you just have to be kind of unstoppable, when that's really not the case. There were so many different emotions that I experienced that day.
Because like as a society and a culture, like we do market our activists, especially like our young activists, as like fearless warriors of change. I sometimes feel like we just pin all of our hopes onto like these individuals, and kind of like just do it for us, and then we can all celebrate when we win. And yeah, you're right, like we don't talk about that process of like going through the moment enough, because I imagine it is petrifying. I'm not sure, but
I think this is the thing about being in the face of collective action. I think it was like a tidal wave hit that room. I don't think anything else could have done that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's really strikes with you. That's not the right word, but it really like resonates. I think it's quite powerful how much like one action can kind of create that ripple effect, like you said. And there were a lot of people who spoke to us after who were like, they also felt kind of like frozen. They couldn't walk out for this reason, or they weren't sure what to do, or they did in the end. But I also think it just reflects on a larger scale of just how much other people can be impacted by different actions. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
Well, I think it inspired us on this podcast,
massively.
all of us, to be, because it started a series of conversations, I think, around the role of oil companies and executives in the conversation. And I think, I don't know how you were, Ben, but for me, my background is human rights. So like, if we're talking about human rights, I got it. I know the playing field. For example, you don't expect to invite Saudi Arabia to a human rights conference and expect them to say anything meaningful or take any action, of course. But I was feeling like this sense of, but maybe we do need to involve them. Maybe we do need to give them a platform. I don't know. I'm, like this sense of like, am I being naive or whatever? And what that moment crystallized for me was like, no, we're not being naive, actually. Like, platforming these kinds of individuals from these companies who, you know, then from all the other conversations that came after that moment, you know, don't tell the truth, aren't being held accountable.
Yeah.
It is just a PR piece. It became very crystal for us as a podcast as to where we stand on this. So I think, like you said, you never know where the impact that action is going to have on the people in the room or beyond.
It's really great to hear that, actually.
Well, it was really great that you did it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, like, from your perspective, what does it feel like to get to the end of something and be like, oh, we were successful there? Like, is it like a... Because I don't know, I can only imagine what the feeling is. Like, part of me thinks it must feel like, oh yeah, like elation. And then part of me also feels like it must be a weird, like, moment of shifting in terms of, like, purpose. And, like, you spent so much time focusing on one thing and now you don't have to focus on that thing anymore. Maybe you need to shift your focus elsewhere. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because there really is, like, that, the two sides. So I kind of feel like when we get to a point of, like, success or, like, a moment where we finally achieve what we wanted to, I'll give a few examples in a moment, it's kind of like, okay, we've gotten here, that's amazing, but then also, is that enough? Have we achieved everything we wanted to, and where do we really go from here? So I remember in 2019 there was the climate strikes in September, and in the UK, for example, we got over 350,000 people on the streets. So it's like, okay, this is incredible. And then Parliament announced a climate emergency. It was like, okay, like we're really getting somewhere right now. But I think for me, it's been really important to kind of put it in its context and see the impact it's had there, rather than looking on the big, like the massive scale of climate action in, like, the global world, essentially. And also, like, the little wins, like in Climate Live, where we held concerts in 20 countries and we brought people together for the climate, which was incredible. And I'm like, okay, that's also a win. Engaging people and getting new people involved is something that should be celebrated more as a win.
Every podcast needs a GOAT.
That's greatest of all time.
And ours is the global bank Citi.
Citi is TEDxLondon and Climate Curious's headline partner and has been with us every step of the way on this podcast, supporting our vision and encouraging us to be courageous and adventurous with our ideas.
Instead of your typical boring ad, we actually thought you might be more interested to hear about some of the initiatives Citi has played a part in.
With the support of the Citi Foundation, the British Asian Trust provides specialised business training to 600 young entrepreneurs so they can earn a sustainable income.
For example, Faria, a young woman facing barriers to independence, took the digital acceleration course and was able to launch a micro-enterprise online and on social media.
It's great to see projects like this supporting female education and encouraging financial independence, which helps build resilience to the impacts of climate change.
Nice one, Citi.
Thank you for making this podcast possible.
Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about Stop Cambo, I wonder if it feels like you need to have that first win and value it, but then it kind of does just open up the, like, okay, like now let's dream bigger, let's do more. I wonder if you feel like, going back to this idea of collective action or being in community, do you think it helps you see or be close to, or I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but be more solution focused rather than being more problem focused, being in these movements?
I think it can really depend where you're at in the movement and what journey you're on. Because for me, until COP26, I was mainly, I think, problem focused, stopping things, and, you know, on that kind of, like, fast pace, we need to stop this, we need to stop this, and not looking too much at, like, the solutions, like my vision of the future either, and not taking the wins as they came. I think I didn't do that as much when I definitely first started out, as everything's quite, like, new and fast paced, and it's all, like, urgent, and it's now, and there's this crisis, and it's like, we have to do this, and there's this, and, you know, everything. I think after COP26, after we had, like, a lot of actions there.
Yeah, like, how do you find hope?
Yeah,
in the midst of struggle,
I also feel, I have to say, I also feel like one of the reasons why we're seeing more of a shift to solutions and imagining the future and seeing what's possible is because in a way, we've done the work to convince people this is an emergency.
Yeah.
Like, if that makes sense. Like, I guess for a while, everyone thought that if we just convince people this is an emergency, they'll take action. Something will change. But now we've realized that people can realize something is wrong, there's a problem, and it's an emergency, and still not do anything because there are other things standing in their way. And so I feel like the whole movement has started to evolve so that now we have to think about solutions, because actually, until we tell people, like, the better world that we want to create, they're not motivated towards anything. They're just like, okay, everything's on fire. I still have to pay like a £800 electricity bill. So
exactly.
What do you want?
So I guess it will just be on fire then.
Yeah, exactly. That's why Stop Cambo, for example, has really been creating this narrative and really pushing forward that actually, you know, acting on climate is something that's about the well-being of us as well and the planet, and that these fossil fuel CEOs and companies like lining their pockets and government action to prioritize their profits over us is actually something that's impacting people every single day when they have to, you know, pay these rising electricity bills, and the cost of living crisis and all of the different things are intertwined. We have to really push that intersectional aspect of it and push the fact that there's so many different barriers to people getting involved, and just saying that there's a crisis isn't going to get people get more people on the streets alone.
No, I have a question, actually, because all of us are people of colour, and Ben, you've spoken about this before, how people in your community, your friends, have said to you, why are you doing climate stuff?
Yeah.
Do you think that there's what I'm curious for both of you, what you feel like, you know, what work needs to be done.
I do not know.
I'm a person of colour, but I really have no community. I'm a bit of a outlier, a nomad, but I'm just curious to know whether there's also some work where it feels like certain communities have just been excluded, and so they feel like this isn't their thing anymore. There are more pressing, urgent matters.
Yeah, because that was to me what stood out about your superhero origin story, was the idea of, like, just in the local area where you lived, there was something happening already, and also that was a conversation that you managed to have in a Jamaican food shop, because I have never succeeded in having a conversation with any Jamaican food shop worker ever in my life. So it's an interesting idea of, like, how do we bring those conversations to our own people, and that's like makes a big separation between, like, an us and them kind of mentality, which is not what I mean, but, like, I'm just talking now. Go for it.
No, it's like, that one issue of, like, air pollution is something that a lot of black communities and black and brown communities, especially across the UK, have really gotten engaged in, because it's something like you can see that and it's there, and it's disproportionately impacting black, Caribbean and African communities specifically in the UK. And I also think, I'm thinking back to why I wasn't as engaged when I was younger, and it's like, well, first of all, I didn't see myself reflected in the environmentalism space. I saw being like an environmentalist and just being in nature something that seemed very, like, white focused, and I didn't think that was really something for me. And also those access to those kind of greener nature spaces is something that I didn't really have when I was younger, and I think that's also a big barrier. But also trying to change how we're approaching the climate conversation, and how, you know, this, because, for example, one of the really big ideas of, like, getting into climate activism is, like, go on the streets and go in the road and get arrested. That's something that's really pushed by groups such as Extinction Rebellion. And, you know, as, like, a person of colour, it's like, I'm
not trying to get arrested, bro.
I'm not trying to get arrested.
Actually, I think I walked out of that one. Yeah.
So, changing that and be like, actually, there's so many roles and different skills and so much different ways that people can get involved in activism, and different groups out there that's not something we need to focus on. And really, again, bringing the intersectional aspect into it, so connecting race and connecting class into it, I think will really help a lot of people.
Yeah, but if you're listening to this, fund a youth organisation. That's a direct action that none of us, I don't think we've ever spoken about, right? Is, like, actually
put your money where your mouth is.
Find an organisation. And what's the name of your organisation that people can fund?
Climate Live.
And one of the things I love about this narrative and this conversation with you is the idea of, like, change and evolution over time, and how activism for you started in one place and has branched out to, like, multiple different places. I'm wondering, like, what the as far as you know, obviously we can't see into the future, but what does the future of your activism look like or feel like for you? Like, are there spaces that you see yourself changing your approach, or like communities that you want to reach that will require a different approach to the one that you've used in the past?
Personally, for me, I had so much burnout from strikes and actions and policy push, like change, and I was like, I need to also engage in something that involves creativity. It really sparks my joy and something that I love. So for me, what I really want to focus on now is mainly two things: combining the arts again with climate, that more creative side, so with Climate Live, but also trying to reach into communities. Like, there's so much to do there that can bring people together in a way that's outside the traditional boxes of what is seen as like climate activism. I really want to focus on actually getting local communities, especially ones like mine, especially people of colour who will be disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis and should be represented and highlighted. And yeah, just for me personally, trying to have more joy within my activism and focus on more joy and things that spark that for me, because it is sustainable. Joy is sustainable, and we can't go on without it because it can be draining work. It's something hard that we're fighting for, and so it's crucial.
So interesting to hear young people say stuff like that about joy. I feel like that's something that you hear from like people in their like 70s and 80s who have like done a lifetime of like activism, and they're like, oh, I realized one day that you can't sustain it unless you are sustaining yourself.
Exactly.
And I love that idea of like, how do we find a way of doing this that like gives us life rather than like drains us of everything we have. And I think art is a great way of doing that, right? Because anybody can make art. It's like the one thing in the world that's like not exclusive, where like anybody can, like, even if you can't play a guitar, you can pick up a guitar and like strum around until you find something, or like pick up a pen or a pencil or paintbrush or whatever and make something.
Exactly.
Which is a nice way of viewing it.
I was going to say, like, it reminds me of the conversation we had a few seasons back with Kumi Nadu, who was talking all about how it's actually arts and culture is going to be the way to take climate to everyone, and that it's actually arts and culture that change, like, societies. If you think about all the big shifts, they've very much been either led by or reflected in that. And I'm just curious to know. Exactly. I want you to tell us. I want you to tell us about like one or two really cool things you've been doing in that space recently.
Yeah, definitely. In the arts, I just started getting involved because I was like, the arts has so much power, so much influence, and the climate crisis is also just a crisis of connection as well, of connecting to nature, connecting to our communities, and what a better way to like unite people than something that connects us all so deeply, which is the arts, and everyone consumes it in one way or another. And so two very cool things I've been involved in is Climate Live, which is a youth-led organisation uniting music and climate, and last year we held concerts in 20 countries, which was incredible. At Wireless Festival we took a big pink solar-powered bus and had as you do.
I mean, if you have one, you better use it.
And if you don't, you better get one.
If we have one, you got to use it. So we had artists on there, and I spoke on there. We had different activists, and there was this one moment where the really cool artist at the end, Louis Colter, so many people came in and were just dancing, and we had our big Climate Live bus, and I was like, this is so cool, this is something cool that we're doing. That was amazing. And then also lately speaking at the Barbican about how to unite the arts and climate, and I was like, these institutions here in London have so much cultural influence, so much power, and there has to be so much more focus on pushing for protecting our planet, and not just creating new stories, but also highlighting the stories that are already out there. And I really think it could touch more people and move more hearts.
You know what I love? What really struck me. First of all, I love you can't see this, listeners at home. Dominique has an incredible smile, which just so comes through when you talk about this. But is the idea that especially with the concerts around the world, is that it's also not just coming from the West. It's like coming from everywhere.
Right, it's not colonial.
It's not like, it's like, we will create the art here, and then we will disseminate it to all of you wonderful, people around the world.
Exactly.
But it's more, and I think that's kind of coming all the way back around. I think that's kind of what, for me, when you talk about community, when you talk about collective action, is this idea that we can start to connect in a way that's different than the power relations that we have currently existing, and replace them. I mean, when I think about this kind of joy and imagination about the future, for me, it's about changing the power systems.
Yeah, exactly. I think, that's something that we really were focused on doing, and something that needs to be more of. It's like not being like, okay, here is these ideas, here's our narrative of what we're going to do here in the West, and you guys need to do the same thing, or we're going to bring in copy and paste, or bring in like a couple of people, or okay, here are some activists from Africa, we'll just put them on stage, speak for a bit, and then we'll
put them on the stage and call it the African stage, and make it as if like, you know what I mean?
Africa doesn't have its own stage.
It's just kind of like this, like it's when you separate people. It's like when you do things and it's just like, oh, this is the women's part. Well, it's like, no, this is the everyone part. Like,
exactly. It's like that tokenism instead of actually everyone being included. I think that's something that needs to be platformed a lot more, is the diversity of people actually being involved in the creating and shaping of these entire events and what's going on, and just going off the fundamental principles that no one is voiceless. So everyone says we need to give a voice to the voiceless. I'm like, people are not voiceless, they're just not being listened to.
I actually think, I don't want to say anything more after that. I think that is a perfect place for us to transition this conversation to our last segment, which relates to something, Dominique, you said earlier about shattering the bubble of perfection.
And now it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
One thing, I mean, recently I've been really into frappuccinos, like actually quite addictive, and I don't always remember my reusable like cold drink cup, so a lot of fraps, and it's not exactly an ethical company.
Can we actually? This is so interesting. Can we talk about it? Can we talk about this for a second? Because
I've got
actually,
a points card.
I love iced coffee.
Yeah,
and as you'll see,
there's one here.
There's one right here. But it drives me crazy that when I go somewhere to get a nice coffee, I just have all of this plastic.
Yeah,
it's not even they like. I know this is a very small problem, but I just want to say that I've been thinking about this all summer and thinking about how I'm never going to carry around.
It's been weighing on me.
It's weighing on a while.
About like, can we? This is a call out to all you big and small coffee companies. You had your paper cups with your recyclable paper lids for the hot coffee, and you helped us out because during the pandemic we couldn't bring our own reusable coffee cups. And to be honest, I don't like those coffee cups because I'm going to spill it all everywhere in my bag. Can you find us a solution, please? Because let me tell you, a paper straw in a plastic cup, when the plastic teeth cut into the straw. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
everyone knows.
It's real life.
It's real life, and you're like trying to get that drink out, and it's not working. No. So basically, this is a call out for a redesign of something.
There needs to be one.
That needs to happen.
Redesign, maybe collapsible coffee cups or something.
An unexpected but lively climate confession. Dominique, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and chatting.
Pleasure to.
It was not where I thought we'd go at the end with the coffee, where I get this off my chest, but I'm really happy. But I also think that being able to see kind of the journey that you've been on and this coming to this conclusion of like finding more joy and connecting to that, and that being a way of like widening out to being more inclusive, I think is a really hopeful message for people who might want to get involved or have just started or are trying to find their space, is that actually thinking about what gives you joy and how do you bring that to this fight or to this movement, I think is really a great message.
Yeah, so important.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure you get next week's release.
We are now officially crowdsourcing Climate Confession, so please leave yours in the ratings and the reviews section, and we'll shout out to you next time.
A huge thank you to our headline partner, City, who has supported us for the past 6 years to bring world-changing ideas to the TEDxLondon stage, and has championed Climate Curious since day one.
And shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
This episode was produced by Josie Colter.
Comms written by Tess Lowry.
Artwork designed by Rebecca Mingus.
Curation by Maryam Pasha.
Mixed and engineered by Ben Beheshty.
Music also by Ben Beheshty.
Presented by Ben Hurst
and Maryam Pasha. Remember, stay curious.